So after a long time coming, it's finally out, the One Piece live action, and this is just going to be my first impressions from watching only episode 1. I'm going to do a more comprehensive analysis once I finish all the episodes, but I also want to take my time with it, so don't expect that for a little bit. So, what do we get from episode 1? What are some takeaways, or what are some things that I noticed? Well, definitely got to start off by stating the obvious. Yes, they are moving a bit fast, there's not a lot of downtime. Seems like they're trying to hit all the major events that happened early on in East Blue Saga, but ultimately, I think it makes sense. Before they even started making the show, Netflix cleared only 8 episodes, and if you think about it, that really does restrict what they can do. You got a 60-minute live-action episode, which can be divided up into, 3 20-minute One Piece episodes, or if you're taking into account the recaps in One Piece, maybe like 4 or 5 One Piece episodes. But still, that's only about like 25 to 30 anime equivalent episodes, whereas the entire East Blue Saga ends around episode 50 in the anime. It's pretty much impossible for them to adapt every single little thing from the anime, but I think they did a really good job of making it as one-to-one as they could have. And honestly, I wish this kind of came out in an era where weekly serializations were a bit more popular. I mean, if it came out like 10 years ago, maybe it wouldn't have looked as good, but at least you could probably expect a weekly release and definitely more than 8 episodes. But that's just the landscape of digital media, and especially Netflix, so they gotta roll with it. So let's get into the content and talk about some of the changes. So one of the biggest changes was obviously, as you might have noticed, right from the opening scene, is seeing Garp at Roger's execution. Now obviously that's not something that was in the anime, and from numerous interviews it seemed like the showrunners wanted to introduce Garp and Marines a bit earlier to, introduce a sense of danger, show that the Marines are on the chase for pirates a bit earlier, I guess maybe so it didn't seem like they were just random adventures going on. Now Garp, at least from the first episode, seems to be a bit too serious. The Garp I remember is strong, he can be serious at times, but he ultimately is a pretty light-hearted guy. Jokes around a lot, laughs a lot, but we'll have to see later on in the season if that changes. So right after Roger's execution, we see Luffy for the first time, and we're gonna get to him, but I want to talk about the flashback with him and Shanks. So obviously from the trailers, a lot of people were apprehensive about Shanks and his actor, and honestly I think that was a product of the angle that they showed him in the trailer. It was pretty bad, but honestly he's, not as bad as I originally thought. And the rest of his crew looks pretty interesting too. Lucky Roo, Yasop, except Ben Beckman. Don't know what's going on there. It was also interesting seeing Kid Luffy. Doesn't really look like Iñaki, and he also doesn't have any accent.
Why are you laughing? How could you let him insult you like that?
An interesting thing I noticed was the scene where he stabs himself in the face to prove himself to Shanks. Wasn't in the original anime, but it's actually taken from the episode of East Blue that came out in 2017. So now let's talk about our best boy, Luffy, and by extension, Iñaki. So, I've said this before, I think Iñaki's probably the best person you could find to play Luffy, and I think he really lived up to that and proved it in this episode. His facial expressions, his conniving attitude, which was really reminiscent of how Luffy was in the beginning. He really just embodies the full spiritedness of his character, someone who wants to become the Pirate King and find the One Piece. Now let's talk about a lot of people's best boy, Zorro. I was a bit confused with his introduction to the show, because I definitely did not remember him fighting a Mr. 7. However, it's true, this was never in the anime and manga, although it was mentioned that Zorro fought Mr. 7 because he refused the offer to join Baroque Works. So for them to add that extra content was pretty unexpected, but also very welcome. And they tied it into the scene with Helmeppo pretty well, as he shows up with Mr. 7's upper body in a burlap sack as his bounty. And when I think about it a little bit more, this really sells the idea of Zorro as a pirate hunter. It's something we obviously knew, but to see it in action, to see just how ruthless Zorro was, I think it really sells his character. We can't talk about Zorro without talking about his actor as well, Makenyu. This is someone I think is also perfect for the role. It really helps that he has his sword training from the Rurouni Kenshin live action that he played a part in. I just wonder if he's going to be able to have those silly moments that Zorro tends to have sometimes when maybe he's drunk or he's angry and yelling at some of the Straw Hats like Sanji or Luffy. But all of his fight scenes were great. You could tell he puts a lot of work into training and doing some of these stunts on his own. But let's get into the third Straw Hat that we saw this episode, Nami. So I think obviously we'll see more of Nami later on in this season, but I think Emily Rudd is also the perfect person for this role. swindler, cat burglar, professional liar, and she can also fight. Now Buggy, okay, at the end of this episode we get a bit of Buggy, and this is someone that I was also kind of weary of from the trailer. Seems like he's giving off that Heath Ledger vibe, which I actually kind of really like. Now the thing with Buggy's character is that he's supposed to act all hard in front of his people and his crew, but inside he's really a coward. So I guess we'll have to see how his mindset is when he's having a monologue or something like that, or when he's in some sort of really tough situation that he can't get out of. But besides Buggy, a lot of the other non-Straw Hat characters were done really well, I think. From characters like Alvida, to Kobe, to even Helmeppo, it just seems like they took the characters from the anime and they just made them in real life. I liked how every time they introduce a villain or someone with a bounty, it flies across the screen and the characters actually interact with it. I thought that was a nice touch. And the special effects looks pretty good too. I think this is something that a lot of people were a little scared of, especially with Luffy's Gum Gum power, but it looks pretty good. I guess there were some Easter eggs as well. You had young Mihawk, Shanks, and Dragon, who people think is Dragon in the green coat, which I tend to agree with, at Roger's execution. Didn't see Buggy, Crocodile, or Gekkomoria, but I guess that makes sense. On the wanted poster board, we saw a bunch of the characters. We saw Bellamy, and if you look closely, Cavendish is there too. That's pretty much all I got though for this first episode. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Did they hit this out of the park? Did they nail it? What are some areas you think they could have done better? Honestly, the bar for live action anime is below the ground at this point. So if we're going by that metric, this thing is like a 10 out of 10. But obviously nothing is going to be perfect. It's never going to be exactly like it was in the original. And that's okay.